I gather there's quite a lot of us online this evening, and lots of different countries and so on, so it's always lovely to have you there as well as have everybody here in the room as well. So so I'll just say a little bit about what we're going to do this evening and also what we're going to do over kind of upcoming weeks. So those of you that come regularly to Dharma Night, what we do is we run kind of series of talks. So we'll do usually a series it's usually about 6 weeks, something like that. And we'll talk around a particular theme for that period of time. And we're starting a new series this evening. So as Kuslasara said, we're starting a series on stories from early Buddhism, basically. So stories from when the Buddha was actually around. So the Buddha lived like 2,500 years ago in India. India and Nepal. The border with India and Nepal has shifted a little bit. So it's what was then India is now partly Nepal, but that kind of geographical area. And I'll just say a little bit about Kuslasara touched on this, but what we're going to be looking at is stories from what we call the Pali Canon. Has anybody heard that phrase before, the Pali Canon? So some of you will know what I'm talking about. So canon, I don't know, it just means like a sort of, like a body or a collection, doesn't it? And Pali is an ancient Indian language, and it's close to the language that the Buddha would have actually spoken. Some people say it was the language that the Buddha spoke. There's a bit of debate about that. But it basically means like the oldest Buddhist text that we have. It's as close to the word of the Buddha as we can get. And as Kuslasara said, it's stories about his life. That's the important thing. So the Buddha did teach. He spent most of his life after enlightenment teaching, but he didn't teach in the sense of, kind of standing behind a lectern and sort of saying, right, okay, this is my series on such and such. Or it's like the Buddha's whole life was a teaching. So he would formally teach sometimes, but a lot of what we know about the Buddha and a lot of how we understand Buddhism is through looking at stories from his life, looking at how he behaved, looking at the people that came into contact with him, what sort of things did they want to talk to him about, what did he say to them, and this is what we're going to be doing in this series, is sort of looking at stories of kind of encounters of the Buddha, basically. So after he was enlightened, sort of stories from his life, people coming to him, asking him questions and so on, and sort of his kind of encounters with his followers and other people. So these stories actually took place, the thing with Buddhism is a lot of it takes place in a kind of a mythic realm. So some of the figures in Buddhism aren't really real figures. Well, I don't know, we're getting into quite tricky territory there, like what's real and what's unreal, but they're not real people who have actually lived. Whereas what we're going to be talking about in this series, the historical Buddha, is a human being that actually lived, and the places where he went are places where you can still go now. So I've spent time in a lot of these places. I've actually just come back from spending a month in India and Bangladesh, so I go there with my work, and I spent quite a lot of time in West Bengal on this trip, which is really not far from where the Buddha would have spent a lot of his time. So I've just come back from a place that is quite near to where the Buddha would have taught. So they're actually kind of real places, and they sort of paint a picture of the Buddha's life, which bring his teaching to life. So the particular sutta that we're going to look at this evening is called, sutta it literally means thread, and it's like a story, basically. When we talk about suttas from the Pali Canon, it's like a story or an episode. And the particular story that we're going to look at this evening is called the Meghiya Sutta, the Meghiya Sutta. So has anybody heard of the Meghiya Sutta or come across it before? Oh, that's great. Good. So that's lovely that you'll be hearing it fresh for the first time this evening. And it's called the Meghiya Sutta because it concerns a young man called Meghiya. So it's kind of about him and one of his encounters with the Buddha. So just to say a bit about who Meghiya is. So he's a monk. He's quite a young monk, and he's what they call the Buddha's attendant. So what that means is that he was kind of like the Buddha's sort of PA, sort of like an ancient Buddhist PA. You know, he would have like done things for the Buddha. He would have organised his visitors. You know, if people wanted to come and see the Buddha, it would have been him that kind of decided when they could do that and when they couldn't. He would have organised his sort of diary for him. You know, he would have organised where he would go and teach and when and so on. So that the Buddha didn't have to sort of concern himself with any of those things. The thing is, like, the Buddha could have done all of that for himself, but I think a lot of the reason why the Buddha had attendants was actually because it would have been enormously beneficial for somebody to be the Buddha's attendant. He would have been, you know, don't forget that we're talking about an enlightened being, so somebody who's completely gone beyond self-concern, is infinitely compassionate, is infinitely creative. You know, he could have done all of this stuff himself, but to be the Buddha's attendant would have been incredibly beneficial for whoever was that attendant. Although, as we'll find out with Meghiya, he didn't fully, he sort of didn't fully take advantage of that. But it was a very, you know, very, very beneficial thing to be in such close contact with the Buddha. Normally, when we talk about the Buddha's attendants, there was a particular attendant that the Buddha had called Ananda, and he was the Buddha's attendant for decades. Like, I think about the last 30 years of the Buddha's life, and he was very, very loving, had a wonderful relationship with the Buddha. They were very, very good friends, and everybody loved Ananda. And this is definitely not the case with Meghiya. It's not quite clear how Meghiya came to be the attendant of the Buddha. When you hear the story, it's almost like he was sent along by the job centre or something like that, because he doesn't actually seem very well suited to it. But anyway, I'll tell you the story and what happened. So in the story, we understand that he was staying among a group of people called the Karlikans, or the Charlikans, I don't know how you pronounce it, and he asks to go off on his alms round. So the monks and nuns that lived around the Buddha would have lived on what they call alms, which is basically they beg for their food. And they go and do that once a day, and they just, you know, they go with their bowl and people put food in their bowl and they eat it, and that's how they get their food. So he wants to go off on his alms round, and he goes off to a place called Jantu village, which is just over the border from Nepal with India. And he goes to a place called the Kimikala River. And when he's there, he sees a mango grove. So has anybody seen a mango grove in real life? Do you know what that's like? Or do you know? Yeah, so one person has. Could you tell us a bit about what it's like?
A mango grove?
Mm.
Well, it's been a long time, but in just mango trees.
Yeah, it's mango trees, yeah. Could you say anything else about it?
There's a lot of monkeys there.
There's a lot of monkeys, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe in the one that you went to, yeah.
Yeah, and it smells really great.
Yeah, so it smells beautiful, doesn't it? Because there's mangoes. And yeah, I've also sort of passed nearby to a mango grove. Very, very beautiful. And the thing about a mango grove is it's very shady. So it smells beautiful and it's very, very shady. Which, don't forget, this is India. You know, maybe it's like spring or summer, so it's very, very hot. And mango groves are lovely places for that kind of weather because they're shaded. You know, so it probably seemed quite kind of idyllic to Meghiya. I tried to find a picture of a mango grove so I could show you all. I thought that would be quite nice. And when I Googled it, I started reading. I thought, that doesn't sound like a mango grove. And actually what came up was Mango Groove. Who are apparently a South African Afro-pop band. And their music fuses pop and township music, especially Marabi and Kwela. And since their foundation in 1984, the band has released 6 studio albums and numerous singles. And their most recent album, 2016's Faces to the Sun, was more than 4 years in the making. So that's Mango Groove, but not Mango Grove. But anyway, I've already told you about a Mango Grove. So Meghiya decides that that's what he wants to do, is he wants to go off to the Mango Grove, and he's convinced that if he goes, that would be a good thing for him, basically. Which is not ideal, because he's the Buddha's attendant, which means that what he's supposed to do is wait on the Buddha and basically do whatever the Buddha kind of says and attend to his needs and put the Buddha's needs first. That's what an ideal attendant would do. But Meghiya is young, he's impulsive, and he thinks, I'm sure the Buddha will understand, I'll go and sort of put my case to him and tell him what I want to do. So he goes and speaks to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, well, Meghiya, as long as I'm still here alone, could you at least wait until somebody else comes? Could you wait until another monk comes? So Meghiya sort of thinks, okay. But he doesn't know how long that's going to be. Is that going to be like a couple of hours or a day or a couple of weeks or something like that? So Meghiya gets really impatient, and he says to the Buddha again that he wants to go and meditate in the Mango Grove. And then he kind of ups the stakes a little bit. So he says to him, but he talks to the Buddha and he says, but you have nothing more to do, nothing more to add to what you have done. So in other words, what he's basically saying is, yeah, but you're enlightened. It's all right for you. What about me? I'm not enlightened yet. Which is a little bit cheeky, isn't it, really? Sort of saying to the Buddha, well, it's all right for you, you're enlightened. But that's what he says to the Buddha. And so a third time he says to the Buddha, look, I really want to go and I really want to meditate in the Mango Grove. So the Buddha says to him, well, as you are talking about exertion, Meghiya, what can we say? Do what you think it is now the time to do. So, what do we think about that? You got any thoughts on that so far? Yes.
It's the type of thing that your parents would say.
What? Do what you think it's the time to do.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily that, but more along the lines of like, you go up to your mum and you say you want to do something, and she says, well, do whatever you think you should. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds like you had quite cool parents. My parents would have just said, like, no, do as you're told, basically. Well, it's interesting though, isn't it? Like, the Buddha doesn't say to him, no, Meghiya, actually, you're my attendant, you should stay here. He doesn't do that. And traditionally, if you ask the Buddha something 3 times, then he cannot refuse you. So Meghiya's kind of called his bluff, really. When he asks him a 3rd time, it's simultaneously quite cheeky, and also he knows that the Buddha's not going to refuse him. So he knows that if he asks him 3 times, the Buddha will kind of have to say yes. The Pali Canon's full of these things where somebody asks the Buddha 3 times, and it often has quite disastrous consequences, because the Buddha will answer you, or he will kind of give you what you think you want. But the interesting thing is, as we find out here, the sort of twist in the story often is that the Buddha will know what you need more than you do. You think you know what you need, but actually the Buddha knows better than you do, because he's enlightened. He can often see the situation better than you can. And this is no different, really. So Meghiya goes off and he leaves the Buddha, and he goes off to meditate in the Mango Grove, and he sits down and he tries to meditate. And what do you think happens? Oh, sorry, that was a few people at once. Yeah, one at a time? Distraction, lots of distraction. Yeah. Anything else?
He feels too guilty.
Say again?
Feels too guilty.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't actually say why he is distracted, but he's very, very distracted, and maybe that is part of it. So just for the benefit of people who are online who might not have heard that, somebody said he was feeling guilty. So it's quite a thing, isn't it, to be in disharmony with your teacher. He might not have even he's so kind of young and cocky that he might not have even clocked the fact that he's in disharmony with his teacher, but he is. And whatever has happened, he can't meditate. He could meditate if he actually just paid attention to his experience, but he's very, very distracted. So he experiences thoughts of sensuality, unskillful thoughts, thoughts of ill will. I mean, I'll read you what it says in the sutta, which is quite funny. It says, "How amazing, how astounding, even though it was through faith that I went forth from home to the homeless life, still I am overpowered by these three kinds of unskillful thoughts, thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of doing harm." So he thinks, well, look, I'm trying to do the right thing, but for some reason it's not happening. He thought that he was going to go and just meditate in this place and, assumed that he would just immediately sort of enter these deeper blissful meditative experiences. But I also find it quite funny that he says, how amazing, how astounding. He's also sort of like, wow, isn't it amazing that I can't meditate at all when I've just been incredibly cheeky to my teacher and told him that I'm basically going to do what I want. But that's what happens. So he goes to find the Buddha and he tells the Buddha what has happened. And he says, just now, while I was staying in the mango grove, I was, for the most part, assailed by three kinds of unskillful thoughts. Thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of doing harm. The thought occurred to me, how amazing, how astounding. Even though it was through faith that I went forth from home to the homeless life, still I am overpowered by these three kinds of unskillful thoughts. Thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of doing harm. So it's quite formulaic. He's sort of repeating himself, and you get this in the Pali Canon quite a bit. The thing with these suttas is that it was originally an oral tradition Buddhism, so it wasn't written down until about 500 years after the Buddha's death. So when it was written down, it had been committed to memory before that. So often these teachings are in quite a sort of a formulaic way. There'll be lists of what happened and so on. So he's kind of repeating himself. He may not have actually said it like that. But it's interesting, isn't it? He's surprised at what is actually happening. And then also, he's not kind of engaging with his own experience. He doesn't then say, so I paid attention to what was happening, I looked deeply into my experience. He's basically like, look, I wanted one kind of experience, and then I realized that that wasn't going to happen, so I left. So, I think a thought that came to me about this particular episode at this point is it's very easy to feel critical of Meghiya, isn't it? Like it's easy for us to look from our vantage point and think, we'd never be like that, would we? He's got the Buddha there and he's not fully taking advantage of that. He's sort of young, he's cocky. If I was in that situation, I'd do the right thing, I'd serve the Buddha and so on. But that might not be the case. You might not actually fully appreciate what you have, available to you. You might actually even have your own version of that. So I don't know if you have that. Is there a version of the mango grove for you? Do you think, actually, if I could just go away and meditate somewhere, actually that would all be fine, What he doesn't seem to want to do is actually just engage with his life and realise that he has everything that he needs right there and then. I mean, I sort of have a bit of this myself, not too much actually. I sort of, I'm pretty content and pretty able to practice in my day-to-day life. But when things are getting difficult, I do have this sort of fantasy of just kind of going off and living, you know, in a sort of a hut up on a mountainside or something like that. And I sort of think that's real spiritual practice, isn't it? Not what I'm kind of doing here, not my day-to-day work, my emails, my meeting up with people, all that sort of thing. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying? Yeah. He has this kind of idealized thing, basically, doesn't he, that he wants to escape to. What he doesn't realize is that actually what he needs to do is just engage with what's really happening here and now. The Buddha says to him, so the Buddha, he comes to the Buddha and he says, look, I'm really surprised that I couldn't meditate. And the Buddha gives him a teaching, and this is the kind of central part of the sutta, really. So the Buddha doesn't lecture him and say, well, I could have told you that. He also didn't say, well, look, I'm actually a bit annoyed with you because you're supposed to be my attendant and you've been going off hanging out around the mango grove. There's not a trace of kind of irritation or annoyance in the Buddha, but he does tell him exactly what he needs to hear. So he gives him a teaching. And the Buddha says to him, when the heart's release is immature, that's how he starts his teaching. He says, well, Meghiya, when the heart's release is immature, and I just, to pause there for a moment even, I think I love that phrase, when the heart's release is immature. So what he means actually is, look, until you are enlightened, or until you've made very, very significant progress towards enlightenment, but I love that phrase, when the heart's release is immature, because what it suggests is, until enlightenment, it's like our heart is not released. It's like it's bound somehow. We can't fully live in an open-hearted way. Our heart's not open. Like there is love within us, but it can't fully find expression. Compassion can't fully find expression. It's like we're sort of imprisoned in some way until we're enlightened. And I love that turn of phrase from the Buddha. So he's saying basically that at enlightenment, the heart is released and we can live in a completely free way. So he says, when the heart's release is immature, 5 things are conducive to its maturing, to its release. He says, first, and this is a particular translation that I'm reading here, he says, first, a lovely intimacy with good friends. And the phrase in Pali is kalyana mitrata. So mitrata means friendship. So mitra means friend. And kalyana means something like beautiful or noble. So he's saying the first thing that you need, actually really what he goes on to say is, really the only thing that you need is kalyana mitrata, which is like beautiful friendship, noble friendship. That is the most important thing. So he says, when the heart's release is immature, 5 things are conducive. First, a lovely intimacy with good friends, kalyana mitrata. Second, virtuous conduct, or behaving ethically. Third, frequent conversation that inspires and encourages practice. So studying the Dharma, studying the teaching, the way things are, and doing that with friends. Fourth, diligence, energy, and enthusiasm for the path. And fifth, insight into impermanence or wisdom. So this is like the culmination of the path. We always think of this as the culmination of enlightenment, which is the arising of wisdom. So, yeah, as I've said, he doesn't lecture Meghiya. He wants him to grow. That's what he wants more than anything, is he wants Meghiya actually to see what he needs and to practice, and he wants him to grow. And so he's not kind of lecturing him, he's basically telling him what he needs to do. So what struck me about this is like, it's almost like Meghiya doesn't see the importance of certain causes and conditions. He doesn't actually fully how wisdom arises or how the path works, basically. He thinks that what he needs to do is just go and practice a certain technique, in this case meditation. So he thinks, oh look, I'll just go off and meditate basically, and that's what I need to do. He's looking at the Buddha who's enlightened, and he's thinking, okay, he doesn't have anything else to do, but I do. And if I go off and meditate, basically, that's what I need to do. But he doesn't understand the kind of central teaching of Buddhism, which is conditionality. So that is that he is, he's not enlightened, which means that he's going to be very, very influenced by the conditions around him, both positively and negatively. And in order to bring about his growth, he is going to need to put himself in the right conditions, basically. And he also can't see that if he's feeling positive and he's feeling sort of inspired, that is because of certain conditions. So he's probably feeling really inspired. He's probably feeling like he's very well on with the path. He's very kind of wise already. He probably feels very energized, very wise, all of that sort of thing. But that's because he's been hanging out with the Buddha. Like, he obviously doesn't get that. So, if you get the chance to spend time with somebody who is really, really wise like that, then that's the effect it will have on you. I have this with people there are some people that I really, really look up to, teachers that I know who really inspire me, that I've learned a lot from just being around. And when you get to spend time with people like that, just being in their presence has an uplifting effect on you. And you get that on retreat as well, don't you? Sanghadharan was talking about going on retreat. When you're on retreat, you're in optimum conditions. So you've got people leading the retreat that are very experienced, they're teaching, you've got other people that are on retreat that are trying to practice with you. Those are optimum conditions, and that's why we want you to go on retreat, is because we want you to experience those conditions because of the effect it has on you. And then, you might have had the experience of being on retreat and you think, oh, this is just how I am now. I've obviously had some sort of decisive shift. I've been on retreat for 10 days. I've seen the way things actually are, and you expect that you're going to go home and, well, the first thing is people are going to look at you and go, oh my God, what's happened to you? You seem so much more wise. It's incredible, which doesn't usually happen. I'm joking there, by the way. And you think then that you can go home and just be in the same conditions and that you'll feel the same. And of course you won't, because the conditions are different. And in Meghiya's case, he's spending a lot of time with the Buddha, so that's going to have a massive effect on him. I mean, that's an incredible blessing and an amazing opportunity to actually spend time with somebody who is so wise, an enlightened being. But he thinks then that that's just him, that's just how he is now. So that's great, okay, I'm now at this level, I'm going to go off and meditate in the mango grove. But it doesn't work like that. As soon as he leaves the Buddha, he realizes that that's the case. And it takes that for him to realize that, really. So one way of talking about that, it can sound quite abstract when you talk about conditions, but I think the best way to think about it is that the path is relational. So the Buddhist path is relational. It's all about conditions. It's about putting yourself in the right conditions as much as possible, and the more you're able to put yourself in the right conditions, and the more you realize that you changing and growing is conditional and is dependent on you being in the right conditions, that then motivates you to be in the right conditions as much as you can. And let's face it, most of the time, those conditions are other people. So not entirely, there are some conditions like, say, for example, here, it's not just about the people. We don't all gather in a porter cabin, we gather in this kind of beautiful space here because beauty is a very lovely condition to be in, and, it opens our heart when we see flowers and it's a lovely environment and all that sort of thing, but this is a spiritual community, and most of the time the community is about the people. That's the primary condition. If you can spend time around other people who are trying to practice, and other people maybe who are a little bit further along than you, and people who are wiser than you are, well, that's a really, really strong condition for you changing. And effectively, that is what the Buddha talks about when he's talking about friendship. So he talks about all of these conditions being necessary, studying the Dharma, energy, all of these sorts of things. But he's saying, look, the primary thing is friendship. But what he means by friendship is not what we sort of mean by friendship in the ordinary sense of the word. So maybe I'll say a little bit about that in a moment, but I'll just pause first there and see if there are any questions or anybody has anything they'd like to ask or any comments. And that includes those of you at home as well. So yes, go ahead.
Sorry, could you just repeat the fifth condition?
It's wisdom. So insight, in the sutta it's described as insight into impermanence or wisdom. And that's basically seeing into the nature of reality. So the question was, could I say what the fifth condition is again? So that's seen as the cultivation of the sort of pinnacle of the path. Basically, it's the sort of end point of the path. That's enlightenment, really, is starting to see or fully seeing into the nature of reality. But interesting, isn't it, that comes about on the basis of that comes about because of positive conditions mostly being about friendship. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
I just wanted to ask, because to me it seems like having the bravery to really question teacher and do something that you honestly feel like you should do. Isn't necessarily an entirely bad thing to do.
Yeah, no, it's not necessarily.
Because that way you learn and you question the teacher rather than just following blindly what they say.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's not. He did learn his lesson at the end, and it wasn't entirely bad. It was probably better than just following blindly what he's told.
Well, maybe, yeah. So I'll just repeat your question just for the people at home. So somebody was making a comment that it's not necessarily a bad thing to question your teacher, because you have to learn that lesson for yourself, and Meghiya learned that lesson. The thing is, we don't know if Meghiya did actually learn his lesson. I don't think. Did anyone know what happened to Meghiya? I'm asking the order members. Does anyone? I don't think he pops up again, does he? So maybe he didn't learn his lesson. I don't know, but I think you're right in the sense of you shouldn't just blindly listen to what somebody says to you. You have to make the path your own. You have to experience that for yourself. So if he has a very, very strong idea that this is what he wants to do, then maybe that's no bad thing. But if somebody's very, very wise, you should at least take what they say very seriously. Personally, that's the way I would sort of think about it, is definitely don't take... and the Buddha would say this himself. He always said this. He said, don't just take what I say blindly on trust. You have to test it out in your own experience. And that might mean going against it. But he didn't just say that in the sense of... he wasn't just sort of saying it to be kind of sort of fashionable or flexible. Or what he's essentially saying is, look, you have to understand the teaching for yourself. You have to understand it in your own experience. So even if the Buddha says to you, all things are impermanent, right? The Buddha's saying that from the point of view of completely knowing that. That teaching is in his bones, like he lives it and breathes it. Whereas for us, we might not have a sense of that. So we sort of take that on trust, and then at a certain point, that if we try that out, that will match with our experience. So say, for example, often the reason why people come along here is because somebody's died or there's a relationship breakup or they've lost a job or something like that. What that means is they then experience that for themselves. It's like they know that teaching to be true. So consciously or not, then people think, actually maybe there is something in this, And it's like the whole path is that over and over and over again. It's like we take that abstract teaching and we have to understand it in our own experience. And that's when it becomes wisdom. So, yes, you're right, that you can't just take what somebody says on trust, and you have to sort of test it in the fire of your own experience, but you also have to take somebody very seriously if they're wise, and certainly if they're enlightened. So it's interesting. But yeah, it's a good point, I think. It's an interesting one. Okay, So what I'll say now is a little bit about what is meant by Kalyanamitrata as opposed to what we mean by kind of regular friendship. So, most of us will we'll all have different definitions of it, won't we, friendship? It will mean different things to each of us, but we all know what it's like to have a friend, we all know what it's like to be a friend, but that's not the same as friendship in the sense that the Buddha's talking about it. So friendship is... if you think of it as a kind of Venn diagram, probably ordinary friendship and Kalyanamitrata has a bit in the middle that overlaps, but it's not exactly the same thing. So when the Buddha talks about friendship, or when we talk about Kalyanamitrata, it's not just hanging out with your friends. So it's not sort of spending time with your mates. It's definitely not banter. And that kind of thing, and it's not. I think the easiest way to think about it is it's friendship where you really care about the growth and development of that person, and that is the primary thing that you care about. So obviously that's quite a high ideal, and it is an ideal. It's not always possible to practice it for us as unenlightened beings. But that's the ideal, it's friendship where the context is development and growth and the development of wisdom. And you want that for the other person and they want it for you. So they want that more than anything else for you. And that might mean that you have to, for example, say things to them that might be difficult. So you're trying to do that in a loving way. But if you can see that somebody's behaving in a way that is impinging on their own growth, then you'd want to talk to them about it. Or it might be that you need to say something that's uncomfortable for you, even about the way you are. And you're doing that so that you can grow, basically. You can grow in a friendship and you can grow as individuals. And you want that for the other person. You want that person to grow and you want the friendship to grow in that context. Your primary thing is not to have fun, and your primary thing is not to the main thing you want from that person isn't for them to make you feel good about yourself. You might have a lot of fun, you might have a lot of laughter. I mean, I've a lot of friends that I'm sort of on the path with, a lot of spiritual friends, and there's a lot of laughter and there's a lot of fun. And sometimes they make me feel good about myself, but that's not the primary thing. The primary thing is that you want each other to grow, and that's what the Buddha wants for Meghiya. So I'm going to read you something here, actually, because I was, when I was looking into putting this talk together, I came across some words by a Zen master. What was his name again? Norman Fisher. And a couple of things he said I really, really liked. So I'm just going to read something that he says about friendship. So he says, in the Buddhist path, spiritual friendship takes place in the context of community. Life in a sangha is built on teaching, dedicated meditation practice, and shared commitment to going beyond self-interest and personal need. Spiritual friendship is less about personal connection than it is about helping one another to grow in faith and goodness. In ordinary friendships, we might connect right away with lots to share and learn from one another, in Sangha life, friendship develops much more slowly. It can take years. So is everybody familiar with this word Sangha? So it's like the spiritual community, basically. So it's one of what we call the 3 jewels in Buddhism. So those of us that are ordained, we wear these cases. And this shows 3 jewels here. And one of those is the Sangha jewel. So the community is like one of the 3 most important things for a Buddhist. So I thought it was interesting what he was saying about it being different from ordinary friendship. Because, in an ordinary friendship, you might meet someone and kind of click with them straight away. And it's often not like that in spiritual friendship. It can take a long time, and sometimes you end up being friends with people that you would never normally be friends with in real life. I mean, I think that's one of the lovely things about being part of a Sangha or a spiritual community. It's not a confession, but I'll just say, like, I've ended up being friends with people that I actually didn't like them when I first met them. And it's really interesting because it just shows you it showed me how superficial my likes and dislikes are, basically. Most of the time, our likes and dislikes are really superficial. Most of the time when we don't like people, it's because they remind us of somebody that we didn't like at school or something like that. It's not usually substantial. I often, if I don't like someone, it's because I think they're a particular kind of person, even though I've never met them before, or I don't know them well, basically. I don't know if you're all very different, aren't you? You're much more developed than I am, but it's like our petty sort of likes and dislikes. And being part of a community, a spiritual community, is a lovely opportunity to kind of go beyond that. So that's one thing, is you can end up being friends with people that you might not have been friends with otherwise. And then the other lovely thing I think as well is, Norman Fisher talks about it taking years. And it's lovely because if you stick around here, or you stick around in our community, or any community, it doesn't have to be this one, but you stick around for a long time, what happens is you're kind of almost like metaphorically, you're sort of walking the path with each other, side by side for years and years. And, like around here, there's hundreds of people. And you might not get to know someone, and then suddenly you end up, in my case, like leading a retreat with someone, or being on a retreat team with somebody, standing next to them every day, washing up for a week or something like that. Or you just connect when you're on retreat, or, you're on a team helping out here or something like that. And suddenly you get to know each other and you become friends, even though you've already known each other for like 5 years or 10 years or something like that. It's really, really lovely. And this thing about becoming friends with someone that you wouldn't normally become friends with, I really like that. Like, it's a bit boring just being friends with people that that like your kind of people. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what happens in most people's lives, isn't it? Is they sort of, they click with certain people, but most of the time it's because those people are like them, It's funny, I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I was talking about a friend of mine, and I said, yeah, he's a great guy, really lovely. He's got exquisite taste as well. He's got really, really good taste in music. And by that, I mean he's got similar taste to mine. It's like, that's what we mean, isn't it? I mean, when you say someone's got really good taste, you don't actually mean they've got good taste. You just mean they've got similar taste to you. And it's a bit like that with friendship, isn't it? And I think there's something lovely about having the opportunity to become friends with someone that you wouldn't be friends with otherwise. I mean, this made me think of, I often talk about this friend of mine, Vidya Jyoti, but she was an order member in our Sangha, who I got to know when I first came along here. So I started getting to know about 20 years ago. And I was like in my early 30s at the time when I came along, and we actually lived in the same block of flats just at the top of Globe Road. So I was in my early 30s, she was in her late 60s or early 70s at this time. I was a young man, she was an older woman. I was quite shy and quite sort of introverted. She was the most brash, outrageous woman you could ever meet. She had this like amazing sort of like Brooklyn accent and no filter whatsoever. She would always just say what was on her mind. And we became friends. We became really good friends. It was lovely. And I would never have become friends with her, basically. And after being friends with her for a few years, she got ill. And she got ill and she died a few years later. And I was with her all through when she died, and I was actually by her bedside when she died. And I've never experienced that. I had never experienced that before. And she had such a strong effect on me. I only knew her for about probably 4 years, or less than 5 years, I think. And I still think of her a lot now. And that would never have happened in another context. I mean, maybe if we'd been working together or something, but still, even not a young guy in his early 30s, woman in her early 70s, and it was just lovely. You know, we used to spend a lot of time together, we used to look out for each other, we used to go to galleries and cook for each other and that sort of thing, and, you know, just what a gift, really. So I suppose what I'm saying is you could look at this teaching and be a bit like, okay, well, what do I need to do to get enlightened? Okay, the Buddha says I need friendship. Okay, so I'm going to go out and make friends. But actually, what the Buddha's saying is this path is one of opening our hearts more and more. You know, enlightenment is living in a completely open-hearted way. And as we move from where we are now to there, our hearts will open more and more. And as we do that, that happens, as a result of that, what we'll probably find is that our friendships deepen because we just become a being who is more open and more able to fully communicate. And at the same time, it's like friendship is path and fruit. It has an effect on us, but also, so it will have an effect on us as well. So it's like it moves us along the path, but then also it becomes the fruit of being on that path as well. Okay, so back to the Buddha and Meghiya. So then the Buddha says to Meghiya, for his further benefit and almost to kind of cement the point, he goes through the list again, and this time he talks about the sort of later items proceeding with the first. So what that means is he basically says, where there is Kalyana Mitrata, where there is lovely intimacy between friends, then there is virtuous conduct. Where there is Kalyana Mitrata, then there is conversation that inspires and encourages practice. When there is Kalyana Mitrata, then there is diligence and energy, then there is wisdom and so on. So what he's saying is, not only is that foundational, is Kalyana Mitrata foundational, but it also, all of the other qualities arise on the basis of that. So this is what the Buddha means, where there's another story from the Pali Canon where Ananda, who I told you about earlier, who's another attendant of the Buddha in later life, he says to the Buddha, I've been thinking a little bit, and I think that friendship is half the spiritual life. And the Buddha says to him, Ananda, say not so. Spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. It's the whole of the spiritual life. So this is what the Buddha means, basically, is that without spiritual friendship, we don't have anything. Like all of these qualities arise on the basis of that. So what struck me as well about this is like the Buddha is exemplifying friendship in this as well. So he's talking about friendship, but he's also exemplifying friendship to Meghiya as well. It's like he's this very, very sort of caring friend, and there's definitely a kind of vertical element there. So there's definitely, the Buddha is an enlightened being and Meghiya is not. And he's trying to help Meghiya to grow towards where he is. And he can see what he needs, but he's doing that in a particular way. He's doing it in a very sort of gentle way. He's trying to get Meghiya to see for himself that, he's kind of barking up the wrong tree slightly. and the Buddha's saying to him what he actually needs. And the Buddha's, kind of saying to him, look, it's not a technique that you need. It's like if you're in the right conditions, i.e. surrounded by the right kind of friendship and the right sort of influence, then you don't need anything else. It's like a flower or a plant. You put it in the right conditions and it will grow, basically. So, I thought I'll start concluding in a minute, but I wanted to say something about having said what I've said about not being sort of utilitarian about friendship. I'll sort of cement that by saying, well, okay, so you're saying that friendship is really important. How do we do that? It's interesting, isn't it? Because in our culture, or not even that, not how do we do friendship, but actually how do we do Kalyanamitrata? How do we do this ideal of spiritual friendship, which the Buddha was talking about? And it could be a whole talk in itself. So I won't be able to say much about that, but I will say a little bit. Because it's interesting, I think in our culture, even friendship in the ordinary sense of the word, before we even get to this ideal of spiritual friendship, is, I think anyway, hugely undervalued. I don't know what you all think. Amelie Yoden gave a talk recently where he and I were talking about this, and he was quoting some statistics on loneliness. And it seems like there is more and more kind of loneliness in our culture. I think we're becoming more and more individualistic. We're more, what the primary things that are driving us or motivating us, maybe not us actually in this room, but in sort of society in general, are, to do with kind of prestige and money and sort of, individualism. And it's like friendship has sort of fallen by the wayside somewhere. I think there was a time when friendship was held up as a very, very high value at certain points in our culture. And it doesn't seem to happen like that now. I mean, I know myself, like, speaking as a kind of middle-aged man, I think I look around me, I always held friendship as a very important value, even before I came to the Buddhist path. And I place a lot of emphasis on friendship and kind of maintaining those relationships. But in a lot of my friends, what I've seen over the years is that there's a sort of a perception that friendship is sort of something you do until you find a partner as an adult, And then you settle down and you have a family, and then your friends kind of like, yeah, it's nice to have friends, you have them over for dinner once in a while or something like that. But you don't really see, if you value something, then you put energy into it. You will put energy into something if you value it. And I think, if you don't put energy into something, it's because you don't value it, basically. And I think those individualistic values have sort of taken precedence, and also the romantic ideal has sort of pushed friendship out the way, basically. It's all about finding a partner and, that being much more important than friendships. Now, I'm not knocking romantic relationships, I'm in one, and I've been very happily in one for a long time. But I think it's that sort of pushed out the ideal of friendship. And actually, I think a life without friendship without real meaningful friendship is actually, it's not really a life. It's such an important value, and actually just makes us sort of fully human. But even then, we can sort of step on from ordinary human friendship to this ideal of sort of Kalyanamitrata or spiritual friendship. I want to make reference to something that somebody said in this room actually on Sangha Day, aptly enough. So we have a festival day here that celebrates spiritual community once a year called Sangha Day. And was anybody here on Sangha Day where the 3 people who'd been around for like 50 years or more gave a talk? Was anyone here at that? No, maybe it was just me. So there was 3 people who'd been part of the Triratna Buddhist community for 50 years or more. And one of those people was the person who taught me to meditate like 25 years ago. So it was really, really lovely seeing him. I remember meeting him when I was a really young man, when I was like in my early 20s. And I turned up at the Liverpool Buddhist Centre like as, kind of scruffy young hippie wearing ripped clothes and stuff. And he was really, really lovely to me and really welcomed me. Anyway, here he is like 25 years later, talking about having been around for 50 years. And part of the context of these talks was, what advice would you give to someone who's fairly new? And he said something which I thought was really lovely. He said, he didn't say like, oh, well, you need to master this meditation technique, or, pay urgent attention to impermanence or anything like that. He just said, keep coming along. Just keep coming to the centre. He said, don't worry about your meditation practice. I mean, maybe that's a separate thing, but he said, look, don't worry about that too much, and don't worry if you don't get on with everyone here. Just keep coming along, basically. Keep coming along. And he said, tea and biscuits is a very, very beneficial spiritual practice when it happens at the LBC, which I thought was lovely. And I would say the same thing. It's like, if you want that kind of friendship, all you need to do is keep coming. Like, it will happen if you just keep coming, if you just keep turning up. That's all you need to do. It's all I've ever done, is just keep coming along. And when I say turn up, I mean actually turn up. So turn up in body, but also turn up in spirit. And that might mean, for example, like helping out. It might mean helping out on a class. It will mean going on retreat. It might mean, being on a team for a retreat, that sort of thing. But the primary thing is just keep coming along and talking to people and, showing an interest in people. That's all you need to do. It's not complicated. Because we are these kind of relational beings, if you spend time with people and you just keep coming along, you will make connections, you will, and that will blossom into friendship. And then, elements of spiritual friendship, of Kalyana Mitrata, because that's what we're doing here. We're not doing ordinary friendship. We're all trying to grow towards this ideal of the Buddha. So if we spend time with each other, that's what will happen, basically. So that's what we need to do. Okay. So just to say some sort of closing remarks about Meghiya. I don't know what happened to Meghiya. He's quite sweet in a sort of way, isn't he? Like I said, I don't know how he became the Buddha's attendant. I don't know what happened to him afterwards as well. He's very enthusiastic, but he's just not very receptive. He sort of thinks he knows what he needs, but he does, he's very kind of open about it, isn't he? He comes back and he talks to the Buddha, and then the Buddha gives him this teaching. But he hasn't yet understood the centrality of friendship, and the Buddha can see this. What he's talking about is that the path is actually friendship. So I gave this title a talk. I think I called it something like a whole path of transformation. And the reason why I said that is because it's like what Meghiya is saying is almost implying that it's just meditation. And meditation is really important. It's really good to learn to meditate. It's really good to meditate regularly. But sometimes what happens is people think that meditation is all that they need to do. And they don't look at the rest of their life, or they don't, think about the fact that actually what we're trying to do is live more in connection with each other and transform our whole sort of being. In fact, sometimes when people talk about, their practice in inverted commas, I don't really like that phrase very much. I think of it as just your life. You're living your life. Sometimes people talk about their practice, and what they actually mean is their meditation practice. Whereas what the Buddha's saying is, no, look, this is your whole life, and the whole of your life is how you are in relation to yourself and other people, and that's spiritual friendship. So it's a whole path, not just meditation. And when friendship's truly present, that's when we start to truly grow. And I'm going to finish with another quote from Norman Fisher, which again I found this very moving, where he's talking about friendship. So he says, "I appreciate the truth and beauty of this teaching more and more as the years go by. To be able to practice with good friends for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years or 40 years is a special joy. So much comes of it. As you ripen and age, you appreciate the nobility and uniqueness of each friend, the twists and turns of each life, and the gift each has given you. When long friendships with good people along the path of spiritual practice are a central feature of your life, it's almost impossible, just as the Buddha says, for spiritual qualities conducive to awakening not to ripen." So we've got a couple of minutes. I'll just see if there's any more questions, and if not, we'll finish there for this evening. Any closing questions or comments?
I have a question about friendship.
Mm-hmm.
I'll see if I can articulate this properly. It's kind of in relation to friendship and impermanence and people coming in your life and out of your life. Kind of how do you value friendship without craving it, I guess, because in my experience in my life at the moment, I've noticed a bit of a pattern with my friends similar to the one that you were describing, where they seem to just be falling off. Particularly my best friend who I did a lot of things with. I've been abroad with her and kind of major things, and she seems to be kind of just drifting away. So how do you kind of value friendship, but also accept that people come in and out of your life? And also sometimes you might meet people, I went on a retreat recently and I didn't ask for anyone's number or anything, and so sometimes people that you really connect with, they just kind of in your life for a short moment, and should you want to grasp onto that, or should you just appreciate it in the moment and let it be, let it go?
I mean, it sounds like you've kind of answered your own question there, really, which is that well, it's you value what's there, and then you accept that it might not last, but I think talking about your friend as well, I think there's something around sharing values with people, isn't there? So if you're trying to do a similar thing to people and you share those values with people, you might be around them for a little bit longer. But I think in a certain sense it's a kind of a practice in itself, isn't it? It's recognising that things, people move on, or people move away, or things happen, or in my case with the friend I was talking about, she died, and I'm grateful for the effect that she had on me, but that couldn't last, because things don't, it strikes me it's probably more a sort of a one-to-one conversation rather than, I don't know if there's too much I can say about that, just answering a question, but yeah, that's the way things are, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's the effect that friends have on us, that can happen regardless of whether it's permanent or not. That's the thing. And in a sense, it's probably built in, isn't it? It's part of that effect is knowing that that's ephemeral, I mean, personally speaking, I feel like I'm kind of the product of lots and lots and lots of people that I've known that have had an effect on me. Some of them are around now and some of them aren't, Yeah. Okay?
Yeah.
All right, lovely. Okay, great. So join us next week for another story from the Buddha's life, from early Buddhism, from the Pali Canon. And take care of yourselves and have a good week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.